Okay everyone, I hope everybody is doing well. This is going to be a bit different than some of my previous videos in that it will present itself as more of a lecture format. And what this lecture will really be focusing on are the similarities and consistencies between anomalous experiences which have taken place over the course of human history in relation to the UAP or UFO phenomena. And what we're really going to focus on in this lecture in particular are the conscious elements of these experiences themselves and how the effects produced by these experiences seem to be bound by collective human consciousness, and how these effects and how they present themselves tend to shift over the course of the changing nature of human collective consciousness and understanding. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So to begin, we'll go over a couple of definitions, one of which is anomalous experience, which is an experience wherein the experiencer cannot adequately comprehend stimuli from an external or internal event. Anomalous events do not fall into any known database of human understanding, thus they are usually classified under various paranormal phenomena. Consciousness, a state of awareness of one's external and internal existence. The origins and locality of consciousness is widely debated. Hypotheses range from consciousness being an internal quality of matter generated by neuron configurations within the brain, to consciousness being an external phenomenon, one which arises within the brain, similar to how a television set receives a radio signal. Consciousness shift, a shift of thought within a population relating to the nature of reality. Usually, a shift in consciousness results in cultural changes of understanding and acceptance. A shift of consciousness can occur at the individual level or at the level of an entire population. These shifts often correspond to human scientific and technological development. Examples of consciousness shifts throughout history include the Golden Age of Islam, the Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, and the Cognitive Revolution, which anthropologists believe occurred around 70,000 years ago. Physical reality, the substrate in which all matter resides. Physical reality is bound by a set of laws which govern the possible actions that can occur. These laws are inclusive of, but not exclusive to, the Newtonian laws. For example, an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted on by an external force, the law of conservation of energy, the laws of thermodynamics, etc. Physical reality is constrained by what is physically possible within systems of function throughout the universe. The nature of physical reality is perceived by organisms as input received by the senses, which respond to external forces by translating them into a conscious experience. UFO, unidentified flying object, or UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, an event which appears physical in nature that occurs in the atmosphere but cannot be identified by known metrics of understanding, usually associated with various other anomalous experiences such as missing time, abduction, or visitation. UAPs are often reported by Air Force pilots from different nations across the world and are commonly cited by the public. The UAP phenomena has arguably existed for most, if not all, of human history and has changed its nature in correspondence with human cultural development. So here are a couple of notable aspects of the UAP phenomena. Just realizing now that's a bit redundant. Notable aspects of UAPs. So to begin with, they didn't just start in the 1940s or 50s, though they have become a lot more prevalent after those dates. One could argue after the first testing of the atom bombs in the American Southwest, that UFO and UAP sightings became a lot more prevalent throughout the world. They have quite possibly been here for all of human history and perhaps even longer. They react to our conscious experience and our cognitive understanding. They leave physical traces behind. Now that's a very important one because it rules out the possibility that these experiences are simply the product of human hallucination. Attention and thought given to the phenomenon increases its prevalence. Now that's another very interesting one. A lot of people who have seen a UFO once in their lives will likely see one again, and a lot of skeptics use this information to discredit people who have claimed to have been abducted by aliens or to have seen UFOs, and that it seems silly to them that someone would see a UFO once and then have several more experiences throughout their lives. But this is a key aspect of the UAP phenomenon, which is oftentimes ignored due to its unbelievability, and the phenomenon itself is inherently deceptive. Now, deceptive is not synonymous with evil. The one thing to note about this phenomenon is that it tends to appear as something that it may not be. Now, there could be multiple different types of phenomena occurring which do appear differently, but one thing that is consistent is that the UAP phenomenon can be perceived differently depending on the observer. Okay, so let's go over a couple of physical and measurable effects produced by UAPs. Burn marks on the body. And these are all things which have been well documented on various different cases, which I can provide in the links in the subject bar below the video. Debris from craft, which are arguably right now in some sort of hangar, likely not in the possession of the US government. I think these things have been moved, probably more likely to private contracting companies, perhaps the Department of Energy or something of that matter. Pins on radar. Now that's a very important one when you have multiple devices picking up these anomalies in the atmosphere. Photographic or video capture. Medical implantation of foreign objects into human bodies. Now there's not a whole lot of solid evidence for this, but there are dozens of claims from even highly respected doctors who have claimed that they have removed objects from human bodies that are completely foreign and not of terrestrial origin. Flattened foliage around landing sites, crop circles, radiation exposure, negative health ramifications, electrical interference, malfunction of electrical instruments. Now that's another very common one within the US military and other foreign militaries, and livestock mutilations. So anomalous phenomena associated with UAPs. So these are the phenomena which occur in and around UAP sightings, such as missing time, abduction experience, invisibility of craft, materialization and dematerialization of craft or entities, prophetic ability to foresee future events in abductees, and telepathy. Now these are all things which have been reported time and time again by people who have claimed to experience UFOs or abduction in their lives. So let's go over some documented reports of UAPs and associated phenomena throughout human history. So this is from Titus Livius. This is in the history of Rome. This was part of the 21st book in the history of Rome. So now this is a very old text here, a translation of course. In Rome or near it may prodigies occurred that winter, or as often happens when men's thoughts are once turned upon religion, many were reported and too easily credited. Some of these portents were that a freeborn infant of 6 months had cried triumph, in the provision market, that in the cattle market an ox had climbed, of its own accord, to the third story of a house, and then, alarmed by the outcry of the occupants, had thrown itself down, that phantom ships had been seen gleaming in the sky, that the temple of hope in the provision market had been struck by lightning, that in Lanovium a slain victim had stirred, and a raven had flown down unto June's temple and alighted on her very couch. In many places, apparitions of men in shining raiment had appeared in the distance, but had not drawn near to anyone. So that's interesting imagery which eerily parallels that of farmers in the 20th and 21st century claiming to have witnessed UFOs and then had their livestock struck out of the sky or plucked from the ground, as one could say. So here's another quote from around the same time. We have an account of a spark falling from a star and increasing as it approached the earth until it became of the size of the moon, shining as through a cloud. It afterwards returned into the heavens and was converted into Olympus. This occurred in the consulship of Octavius and Scribonius. It was seen by Silanus, the proconsul, and his attendants. So, what historians have written about this is that it would be difficult to reconcile this phenomenon with any acknowledged atmospherical phenomenon. Okay, so also in ancient Roman texts, we have another excerpt here. But presently, as they were on the point of joining battle, with no apparent change of weather, but all of a sudden, the sky burst asunder, and a huge flame-like body was seen to fall between the two armies. In shape, it was most like a wine jar, and in color, like molten silver. Both sides were astonished at the sight, and separated. So here's another interesting one. Residents of Nuremberg saw what they described as an aerial battle, followed by the appearance of a large black triangular object, and then a large crash outside of the city. The broadsheet claims that witnesses observed hundreds of spheres, cylinders, and other odd-shaped objects that moved erratically overhead. So this was in the late 1500s, and this actually made major headlines in Nuremberg when this occurred, and has never been able to be explained by historians or anthropologists. So this one's from Japan. The story of a UFO appears in the 20th volume of the, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, Diary of the Annals of the Joseon Dynasty. So what the quote we have here is, the sun was bright and clear at Strabismus on August 25th, but suddenly an object appeared in the sky and made a small sound. The shape was like a big vial, but the top was pointed and the bottom was big, and it was as if it was going to fall to the ground from the middle of the sky toward the north. As it fell down, its shape gradually increased and was about 3 or 4 sheets, and its color was very red, and white energy appeared in succession in the past, and then disappeared after a long time. After this disappeared, there was a sound of thunder, which vibrated the heavens and the earth. The author of this mentioned a flying object in the shape of a vial. The flying object that was seen in this specific area was depicted as if it were a modern airplane. It is said that this same phenomenon was observed in other areas of Gangwon-do on the same day. So here's a story from 1803. Local fishermen reportedly saw a vessel drifting in close by waters. They say when they investigated it, a beautiful young woman they described as having red and white hair had dressed in strange clothes appeared. The fishermen claimed that she held a square box that no one was allowed to touch, and that she spoke to them in a very strange language which they had never heard before. Some UFO believers think this story was a credible document of a close encounter of the third kind in Japan. Historians and ethnologists consider it folklore. Moving over to Europe, divination rituals from Celtic mythology, which I've spoken about in a previous video, often depict the consumption of something like a salty oatmeal-baked bannock, which would induce vivid prophetic dreams. So somewhat of a psychedelic substance here. These rituals were part of a long-held practice designed to invoke divine intervention in order to foresee future events. Irish and Celtic folklore often portrayed such events as having a close association with the spirit realm, which sometimes was referred to as Oinagat. In much of this folklore, these fairy realms are depicted as existing parallel to our world, yet distant and without a concept of time as we understand it. The entities associated with these realms are sometimes referred to as the good people, and are often described as small little men who abduct villagers and children, occasionally for years at a time. A hybrid or crossbreed between a human and the good people results in the birth of a changeling. So that's very similar to modern day abduction cases where abductees claim that they are forced to take part in crossbreeding experiments between alien entities and humans. So here's another part from Celtic folklore. Another part of this conversation generally turns upon fairies. These, they will tell you, have frequently been heard and seen, nay that there are some still living who were stolen away by them and confined 7 years, according to the description they give of them, who pretend to have seen them. They are in the shape of men, exceedingly little. They are always clad in green, and frequent the woods and fields. When they make cakes, which is a work they have been often heard at, they are very noisy, and when they have done, they are full of mirth and pastime. But generally they dance in moonlight, when mortals are asleep and not capable of seeing them. As may be observed on the following morn, their dancing places being very distinguishable, for as they dance hand in hand, and so make a circle in their dance, so the next day there will be seen rings and circles on the grass. Now in all this there is really nothing but an old fabulous story, which has been handed down from the times of heathenism, of a certain sort of beings called Lamé, which were esteemed so mischievous and cruel as to take away young children and slay them. These, together with the fauns, the gods of the woods, seem to have formed the notion of fairies. And here's a story which I will not read, but it basically depicts the abduction of a child by fairies, and this child was taken to a fairyland. If you would like to read it, you can pause the lecture here and take a read. I'll also be putting the link to this in the description box below. So here's another interesting thing this is from Roman mythology. There were 6 main stages in the ritual. Now this is describing ritualistic sacrifice of cattle. The procession of victims to the altar, the prayer of the main officiant at the sacrifice, and the offering of wine, incense, etc. The altar, the pouring of wine and meal over the animal's head by the main sacrificant, the killing of the animal by slaves, the examination of the entrails for omens, the burning of parts of the animal at the altar, followed normally by a banquet. So here's another quote from Rome from around the same time. The thief who draws a herd away by single-handed force is a common figure in mythology, and it is logical that, if the bull is the breeding ground for generated souls, the function of the cattle-stealing god will be to reverse the effect of birth. So this goes back to the Mithraism, which was an ancient Roman religion, which was inspired by took a lot of inspiration from ancient Mesopotamian Zoroastrianism from what would today be considered Iran. And this is a common theme which we find is the theme of the bull, sometimes referred to as Moloch. And so there's a peculiar relationship between sacrifice and cattle, and as well as anomalous experiences, aerial phenomena associated with cattle abduction across this ancient Roman mythology. So let's get into a bit more of the modern history. In the late 1890s, a series of mysterious sightings across the United States took place. Dozens of witnesses described seeing large airships in the skies, usually appearing to possess technology which had not yet been developed. Now that's an important thing to remember. In many of these accounts, the crew of the mystery airships were reported as being human-like and sometimes claiming to have come from Mars. The mystery airship phenomenon is largely accepted as the precursor to the modern-day UFO sightings, in that the effects of the phenomenon associated with the mystery airships often parallels those associated with alien abduction and UFO sightings. It has been disputed by most researchers that the airship sightings were experimental government zeppelins. However, some functional blimp-like aircraft had been developed before the 1890s, although they did not possess the aerodynamic capabilities of the mystery airship reports. So what we know about the mystery airship reports is that they can be traced back as early as 1868 from a man in Chile who encountered something like a shining bird, which he described as being driven by a noisy motor. And then there's a story from 1897 where there's a grounded airship which these local villagers of Springfield, Missouri observed, where a man encountered two humanoid individuals who spoke a very strange language and claimed to have come from the stars when questioned about their origins. And what we know about this airship phenomenon is that it kind of dissipated at the turn of the century when the technology of Zeppelins was becoming more and more widespread across the world. And the Grey Archetype, so this is also something which is very crucial to the abduction phenomenon, can kind of be traced back to Aleister Crowley from 1919, where he conducted a ritual and claimed to have summoned the spirit of the deceased Lama Lang, and he described it in his illustrations as having very large head, very large almond-shaped eyes. And this is arguably one of the first depictions of the Grey that appears in modern literature. Lam, the name given to this entity, has been associated with Mars and Sirius and the Andromeda galaxy. Now moving into aviation, when we get into the 20th century, we find records released from British intelligence in 2010 which describe a massive UFO cover-up from the early 1940s. In 1944, Winston Churchill banned reporting of UFO incidents to prevent creating a mass panic. The reports given to Churchill described an incident involving a Royal Air Force pilot who was returning from France or Germany during World War II and was intercepted by a metallic object which matched the pilot's speed and flight course. During World War II is also where the Foo Fighter term comes from, where the British pilots would have claimed to see these sort of flying fluorescent orbs flying alongside their aircraft. And arguably the modern flying saucer archetype begins around the 1940s with the crash in Roswell, which occurred in 1947 in New Mexico, which arguably launched the UFO phenomenon into the public spotlight. And what we know about this is that the headlines were published in the local paper where the U.S. military stated that they had recovered debris from a flying saucer, and then later they discredited that claim and said that it was in fact a weather balloon, which what we know from today is that many government officials involved in this cover-up claim that there was something there was a craft, there were bodies, and this was not a weather balloon. Continuing with this, the tic-tac shaped UFO is something that has become more prevalent in the 20th and 21st centuries. One of the earliest sightings was reported by a Swedish airline pilot in 1943, which was declassified recently in a CIA report. FBI report from 1964 describes pilots encountering a UFO that appeared similar to a flying butane tank. Then we just have 1952, American pilots of a DC-4 airliner from Pan American Airways reported seeing 8 round and glowing objects in the sky. We have into the 50s in Japan, massive blue objects being seen. And it just continues. We have former presidents like Jimmy Carter claiming to have seen UFOs. Then we have in 1969 the massive Berkshire UFO sightings, which 4 families of no connection reported being abducted, and hundreds of witnesses reported seeing these objects, which investigators were able to track along a path in accordance with different eyewitness sightings. And the modern abduction cases, we have Betty and Barney Hill, who encountered a metallic and glowing disc driving south of Lancaster in New Hampshire. Later, through hypnosis, were able to recall being experimented on and so forth, which is something that is reminiscent of medieval French folklore of demons and succubi taking men and women into strange environments and putting needles into their navels, which is something that Betty Hill described during her abduction experience, and very strange experiments being conducted. Some could argue are similar to that of a crossbreeding program, something which also appears in Celtic mythology with the changelings, incredibly common in biblical stories of demons and succubi, wherein humans are paralyzed and their semen is extracted, or their eggs, if they're female, are extracted, taken to produce a type of human-demon hybrid being. And so over the next half of a century, the alien abduction phenomenon became embedded within American folklore, as hundreds of thousands of people claimed to have experienced close encounters with otherworldly beings. So this is something I've also talked about in a previous video. In the early 60s, a guy named Joe Simonton witnessed this flying disc land in his farm. 3 men, humanoid, almost Italian-looking men, stepped outside, and they pointed to a container, and Joe took this as a sign that they wanted water. So Joe ran inside, came out with the water, gave it to the men, and these men had been cooking something over a flameless stove, and they gave this food, which was pancake-like in appearance, to Joe, which he said tasted like cardboard. And this is very similar to the Celtic mythology of the fairy lands and the fairies that would emerge to bring salty baked bannock to townspeople and feed this to their abducted victims and so forth. And you really have to wonder, what is going on here? What an odd thing to have occurred. But then again, this entire phenomenon is so incredibly bizarre and beyond the capacity of human understanding, I think, at this point, especially when you look at it from a physical perspective, that really anything seems to be possible in these realms, whether they truly simply are just psychological or if this is something much greater going on, because that's what I tend to believe, given all the data, given the fact that there are physical effects from these experiences. We really just don't have enough data to conclusively say, whether this is A, B, or C. But it's one of those 3. It's one of something which is existing parallel to our physical reality. So then we have the Snippy the horse, which occurred in 1967. A horse named Lady was found to be severely mutilated in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. The tissue in her face removed, and it appeared to be a precise operation. And the farmers who found Snippy noted a smell similar to that of acetone that lingered around the corpse, and there was no sign of bloating, decomposition, or predation. And this would become a very common phenomenon across the United States, and between 1975 and 1979, there was a massive surge of cattle mutilation cases, to the point where former Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt called for a multi-state conference to investigate this phenomenon. And ultimately, the investigations were all left open-ended and pretty much cold cases. This is what Schmidt stated during that time. There are few activities more dangerous than an unsolved pattern of crime. Such a pattern is the mutilation killings of thousands of cattle, horses, and other animals over the past several years throughout many states. The economic losses suffered by individuals probably have reached $2.5 million or more. And eventually these investigations lost traction and Operation Animal Mutilation was closed. So getting into the 1980s, we have Robert Lazar, who comes forward in Las Vegas and states that he had worked at a military base south of Area 51 called S4. And Lazar claimed to have been recruited to work on the reverse engineering of alien craft. And he claimed that he was recruited for his expertise in advanced propulsion. He was previously employed at Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico. And his story has arguably withstood the test of time. Skeptics have been trying to debunk his story since he came out in the late 1980s. And most of the claims which he has made have stood true, and more stuff that he talked about, like Element 115, different aspects of the facility itself at S4, even simple security measures on how to get into S4, different x-rays that would measure the length of bones in your hand to allow you to enter the facility. This is stuff that he talked about decades ago that people said was ridiculous. There's no way the military possesses this type of technology, and just recently these things have been coming out as true. So the simple things of his story have withstood the test of time. And Lazar, he dealt with a lot of briefings, and a lot of which he thought could be misinformation, because the entire project was so compartmentalized that it was really difficult to truly know what was actually an accurate report or what was being force-fed to him in the event that perhaps he would go out to the public and leak this information. And one of the things which he had read during a briefing was that the craft were obtained after an archaeological excavation, though Lazar remains skeptical of this fact. So one of the other most famous UFO reports is from 1990 in Belgium, where dozens of witnesses reported seeing a triangular object in the sky over Ons. The sightings were allegedly investigated by the Belgian military, and the conclusions of this investigation have never been surfaced, have never been published. It wasn't until the late 2010s when Air Force pilots such as David Fravor started coming forward with accounts of flying objects, which defied contemporary aerodynamics. So this is where this whole UAP phenomenon really gained traction, and David Fravor even corroborated Bob Lazar's descriptions of the craft, and pilots like him have since given more credibility to Lazar's story. And along with government officials and military pilots coming forward with these claims is photographic and video evidence which has been leaked through the Pentagon. And I've always been a bit skeptical of the reasonings for this leakage, but I think it's fair to say that perhaps the U.S. government and the U.S. military are on the verge of being exposed, perhaps by a foreign government. There's evidence that both China and Russia have been looking into this stuff about as long as the United States military has been looking into the UAP phenomenon. It's likely that the most recent leaks, in particular the one which occurred on June 25th this year, 2021, that the reasoning for these leaks is other governments, perhaps China, is also going to take this stuff to the UN, and that they have information about this that they've been gathering through observations over the past few decades, and that the US doesn't want to look like the only one who doesn't really have this information. So I think in the next couple of years we're going to see multiple foreign governments coming together, perhaps at the UN, to disclose this type of information. And whether that be a planned leakage or not, I am unsure. Perhaps the military really doesn't even know much about this stuff. I think they may have obtained these debris back in the 40s and 50s, but since I think these things have been relocated to private contracting organizations, something like Patel National Industries, which Jacques Vallée has pointed to or name dropped on a couple of occasions. So there's something that is going on here, without a doubt. So let's talk about the deceptive nature of the unidentified aerial phenomena. So accounts of UAPs landing and beings exiting from craft are common across history. In some of the mystery airship sightings from the 1890s, beings claim to have come from Mars. Some abductees in Irish mythology and folklore report beings stating that they come from far-off lands or fairy realms. More recently, entities associated with the UAP phenomenon are thought by many to be from other star systems. And in a way, perhaps all of these different things are true. And this is my biggest qualm with the whole ancient astronaut hypothesis, wherein ancient astronaut theorists believe that the biblical tales and biblical sightings of aerial phenomenon, which are heavenly to say the least and defy contemporary physics and understanding, ancient astronaut theorists believe that previous human societies did not possess the vocabulary or scientific understanding to describe technology that would be from an extraterrestrial civilization. And they acknowledge that the ancient peoples, in respect to their culture and time, would be reflecting their own cultural beliefs onto these unexplainable anomalous experiences. And so they acknowledge that over time, the description and the identity of these entities has shifted in correspondence with collective human understanding. Yet they fail to recognize that they themselves may be subject to the same cultural human tendencies to reflect your own era onto an anomalous experience. So who's to say that it ends here? They were trolls and demons yesterday, they're aliens today. Who's to say what they'll be tomorrow? And I think that's the biggest flaw in the ancient astronaut theory, that these things must be aliens, because we have technology like that today. We're going into space and we know about the cosmos and the possibility of life, extraterrestrial life. So therefore, these phenomena must be aliens. I think that's just falling subject to the same tendencies which our ancestors did, which was to say that these things were trolls or demons or fairies. But that doesn't mean I don't think that it's not any one of these things. I think whatever it is, it's real, it's something that exists, and it's a consciousness-based phenomenon. But to definitively say that it's this or that, I think we're just not there yet. To talk a little bit about the religious connection, some devout believers of the Abrahamic religions associate the UFO and UAP phenomena with demonic doings. The Bible speaks of demonic signs and wonders that will reveal themselves to humanity at the end of times. Biblical demons are described as appearing before humans as wondrous and enlightened beings in an effort to deceive humanity and bring forth the Antichrist. Televangelist Hal Lindsey has suggested that the UFO phenomenon is real and that it is propagated by demons who will aid global governments in their progression toward a UN-led New World Order. Now, Hal Lindsey is kind of, he's a televangelist. I don't think I need to say much more, but that doesn't completely discredit this idea. And I think that's a very interesting idea, that, something that's common with demonic biblical experiences is that when given more attention to a demonic presence, that presence tends to increase in prevalence. And that is a parallel with abduction and alien UFO visitation phenomena. And then again, the progression toward a UN-led New World Order, there is a lot of government disclosures going on right now, and I think eventually these things will be brought up to the UN, and and with the whole global pandemic and the everything that's going on in that regard, it does seem like we are on a shift toward a global government. And now I can't say exactly when that would occur, but there are things which seem to line up. But I don't think it's good to jump to any conclusions and automatically associate the UFO phenomenon with a demonic presence, because we really don't know. We just really don't know, and that could bring about a lot of negative things, I believe. But talking a little bit more about it, demons are present in almost every culture's mythology. They're perilous beings, one that inhabit a dark world which is void of love, compassion, and empathy. Demons are complacent and feed off of fear. A demonic presence increases in prevalence the more it is recognized and engaged. So again, modern-day abductees often report being subjected to multiple abductions throughout their lifetime, and many people who report seeing a UFO will often experience multiple sightings afterwards at different points in time. So UFOs are sometimes said to follow certain people throughout their life, like Stan Romanak and his whole story, which has been under a lot of scrutiny since it came out. I think it was a Jeremy Corbell documentary where he was interviewed, but he also had some shady things about his past. But so interpretations. So, like I said, some people of faith will assert the claim that UAPs are a deceptive and demonic presence, being mislabeled today as something scientifically possible, such as extraterrestrial beings. Inversely, ancient astronaut theorists and other researchers will claim that demonic mythology from antiquity is the product of ancient ways of thinking and viewing of reality. In this view, ancient peoples lacked the understanding and vocabulary to comprehend alien technology, thus misinterpreting it as demonic. Both these hypotheses may be correct, or they may both be misleading. It's entirely possible that all these experiences are the product of the same phenomenon. However, that does not imply that the phenomenon itself is demonic, nor does it imply that it is extraterrestrial. They just may be synonymous. A Russian doll or a Matryoshka doll, one of those little dolls that have smaller dolls inside, could be something which is a similar archetype and mirrors the UFO and alien Grey and abduction experiences. So similar to a Matryoshka doll or a Russian doll, the UAP phenomenon doesn't seem to reveal its true nature when under scrutiny and observation. The deeper investigators delve into the phenomenon, the stranger it becomes. It could be possible that we are dealing with technology so far ahead of ours that it appears deceptive and confusing in nature, when it in fact is simply just too complicated for us to cognitively grasp. Yet, the spiritual element of UAP sightings and abduction cases is too reminiscent of folklore and mythology. The UAP phenomenon operates in a similar manner to an optical illusion, in that the closer one looks at the phenomenon, the more distorted it becomes. This may be due to the state to which the phenomenon belongs. If the phenomenon is consciousness-based, then it would have no reason to behave in accordance with the laws of physical reality, and therefore would be subject to change when under observation. So somewhat like subatomic particles, which when under observation behave differently than when not under observation. From amassing eyewitness reports and abduction cases across the globe and contrasting them with ancient mythology and folklore, it becomes apparent that there are forces interacting with the manner in which human culture develops. There are objects which frequently maneuver within our airspace that we cannot identify, and there is a reason to believe that they are a part of a very old phenomenon. It is unclear if they want something from us or if they are attempting to give us something which they possess. So we kind of end with an open-ended conclusion here. The UAP phenomenon is not the result of foreign government technology. And we know this from several reports, which I'll also link in the description below, one of which was the one from June 25th of this year. They don't rule it out, but it seems incredibly unlikely. The media has altered articles from the past which refute the UAP phenomenon, in response to the shifting zeitgeist of the public surrounding the phenomenon. The UAP phenomenon itself sometimes behaves in a manner which defies the laws that govern physical reality. Anomalous experiences associated with UAP encounters remain constant across human cultures and time, and aspects of the UAP phenomenon respond and react to human consciousness and observation. That's it for today's lecture, and now this is just the beginning of hopefully a series of lectures which I'll be making on this topic. And these topics, actually, for that matter, because this is so deep and this goes so far beyond the surface. You know, when you look at Earth and you see the vibrance of biodiversity and of conscious experience that exists on a sliver, a tiny little film on top of the Earth's crust, and it doesn't go much far above it, and it doesn't go much far below it. The deepest depths of the ocean and the highest points of biological flight or human technological flight barely scratch the surfaces of these open expanses. And I think it would be naive to suggest that the complexity which we see here on our tiny sliver of existence is only on this sliver of existence. I think that would be incredibly naive to assume. I think the deeper we go, we'll find similar things, and I think the further out we go, the same will occur. It's fractal in nature, I believe, complexity of conscious experience throughout the universe, and it may not feel that way because we're isolated, because we're far away from other planets and other star systems. We're very cut off. But I think when you look at anything closely, when you look at an anthill closely, it looks isolated, but when you extract your viewpoint and you look at things from an aerial perspective, from an outside perspective, you see uniformity. You'll see other anthills, you'll see other trees, other similar artifacts, and the same goes for human dispersal across the globe. And I think it's naive to believe that the rest of the universe is exempt from this uniformity, because that's what we tend to see, is this fractal uniformity here on Earth. And I think that likely continues throughout all of physical reality. And when we go into non-physical reality and consciousness, there's really no telling what could be in existence. And so I think it's very likely that we're being contacted right now with beings which perhaps are using avatars to manipulate our physical third-dimensional reality, or perhaps these things really are biological life that evolved somewhere else in the universe, or these are just something completely unknown that we really don't understand. But the fact of the matter is that you have millions of eyewitness reports and hundreds of thousands of credible government and military reports of these things, and video and cover-ups and proof that all this stuff is going on. And so much of it is similar. These archetypes are so similar over the span of human history. To ignore this would be, I think, to ignore the most pressing issue that humans have ever come across. And if it turns out to be nothing, then it's nothing. Then we can cross it off. But it really doesn't appear that way. So without further ado, I'll leave you with that. And of course, I always encourage open dialogue and discussion. And please, if there's anything in this video which is inaccurate, point it out. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what this is all about. Censorship is a terrible thing, and we really need to create open and free dialogue on certain controversial topics. So yeah, that's it for today, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.